There are moments in sport where you can actually feel the exact second history shifts, and today, on that lawn at center court, every single person in the building felt it at the same time. Nobody walked in expecting to watch an era end. Nobody. And yet here we are, hours later, still trying to catch our breath, because what just happened out there is the kind of thing people are going to be talking about for decades. A 21-year-old from the Philippines named Alex just did something that will follow her for the rest of her life, and honestly, it is going to follow this entire sport too. Before we even get into the play-by-play of how this unfolded, I need you to understand exactly what was on the line here, because once you know the full weight of the story, the result is going to hit you about 10 times harder than it already has. So, let's back up for a second and set the scene properly. The woman standing across the net from Alex today was not just some name pulled out of a bracket. This was the reigning Wimbledon champion, a 6-time Grand Slam winner. For years, people wrote her off as a clay court specialist, someone who could dominate on the slow red dirt but would never quite figure out grass or hard courts. She spent most of her career fighting that label, proving people wrong one tournament at a time, and then 12 months ago, she finally silenced every single doubter by winning this exact title. And she did not come back this year looking rusty or complacent. She came back looking sharper than ever, cruising through her first 2 rounds and barely dropping more than a handful of games in either match. That is the kind of cold, ruthless form that makes everyone else in her section of the draw quietly start planning for an early exit. And then there was Alex. Rewind just 12 months, and almost nobody outside the die-hard tennis world even knew her name. She was out there grinding through qualifying rounds, chasing ranking points, fighting just to prove she belonged anywhere near the main draw of a Grand Slam. But something clicked for her this season. She picked up a title in Birmingham. She made a semi-final run in Berlin. And when Wimbledon rolled around, she showed up seeded for the very first time in her career. That milestone alone meant something far bigger than her own personal journey, because no player from her country had ever made it this deep into a Grand Slam before. She was already writing history just by being there. And 2 days before this match even started, she had already been through the ringer once. A brutal 3-set battle against the very player who had knocked out Serena Williams earlier in the tournament. Alex fought back from a set down to win that match, and it was not just about advancing to the next round. It was personal. She was avenging a painful loss from the year before, a defeat she has openly admitted took her months to get over emotionally. So, by the time the draw paired her against the defending champion, the entire tennis world reached the same lazy conclusion. This would be a valuable learning experience for the plucky underdog and a routine, uneventful step forward for the favorite. Instead, what unfolded was the most jaw-dropping collapse this tournament has witnessed in years. A slow, agonizing unraveling that absolutely nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. To really understand how this fell apart the way it did, you need to know what each of these 2 women brought into that match, beyond just rankings and scorelines. Alex trained for years at an academy on the island of Majorca, a place built entirely around the philosophy and legacy of one of the most relentless competitors this sport has ever produced. And if you watch today, you could feel exactly why that training mattered. She never once looked rattled, not even when the match seemed to be slipping through her fingers in the second set. Talented young players burn out on tour constantly because they cannot handle the mental grind of the sport. But Alex has spent this entire season quietly proving that she is simply wired differently from most players her age. Her opponent, meanwhile, walked into this match carrying a reputation that very few active players on tour can match. An aura built on relentless topspin, elite court coverage, and a return game that has broken the spirit of dozens of opponents throughout her career. Her breakthrough on grass last summer was supposed to have put every lingering doubt about her game on this surface to rest for good. These 2 had actually crossed paths twice before, splitting their head-to-head evenly, with the champion getting the last laugh in their most recent meeting. In her pre-match comments, she had even admitted, almost prophetically, that Alex's unpredictable game, full of tricky changes of pace and unconventional angles, presented a genuine challenge. She knew going in that this was not going to be easy. What she absolutely did not see coming was watching her own game completely collapse in front of a roaring, increasingly electric crowd. When both players finally walked out onto the court, you could physically feel the tension buzzing through the stands. Longtime Wimbledon regulars found themselves surrounded by an enormous, flag-waving contingent of supporters who had clearly traveled a long way specifically to witness history in the making. And it became obvious almost instantly that Alex had not shown up simply to enjoy the experience or soak in the occasion. She wanted to win, and she wanted it badly. She won the coin toss and made the bold decision to return first, immediately signaling that she intended to dictate the terms of this match rather than sit back and wait for an invitation to compete. And what followed in that opening set was some of the smartest tennis you will ever see played against someone of this magnitude. It genuinely looked like Alex had spent weeks studying exactly how to unravel a heavy topspin baseliner on fast grass, and she executed that game plan flawlessly from the very first game. Her low, skidding backhand slice kept dying just above the turf, forcing her opponent into awkward, uncomfortable positions where she had to scoop the ball up almost from around her ankles. That is a nightmare scenario for any player relying on an extreme grip built for high-bouncing topspin shots, and the unforced errors started piling up almost immediately. Then, just as her opponent seemed to be finding any kind of rhythm at all, Alex would suddenly rip a flat, blistering shot down the line, catching her completely flat-footed and second-guessing every read she made. And then came the drop shots. These were not deployed as some risky, low-percentage gamble. They were used as a calculated, repeated weapon, luring the champion forward into unfamiliar territory near the net, an area where she has historically looked far less comfortable than she does from the baseline. Before her opponent could adjust, Alex either whipped a clean passing shot by her or simply waited for the rushed, awkward volley error that inevitably followed. You could see the tension building with every single game, the anxious glances toward her coaching box growing more and more frequent, as if she was searching desperately for answers that simply were not coming. By the time Alex sealed that first set, having broken serve twice along the way, a low murmur of disbelief rippled through the entire stadium. The invincible aura that had surrounded the defending champion for years suddenly had a very visible, very real crack running straight through the middle of it, and everyone in that building could see it. And of course, everyone in that arena, myself included watching from home, expected the inevitable fight back. Champions of this caliber simply do not fold without putting up serious resistance. For a stretch during the second set, it genuinely looked like order was about to be restored. She found deeper, heavier returns. Her serve suddenly picked up venom out wide. She started pinning Alex behind the baseline, exactly where she wanted her, dictating rallies the way she has done to countless opponents before. An early break arrived, punctuated by one of her signature roars that has become almost a trademark celebration at this point in her career. And just like that, the second set belonged entirely to her. Aggressive, suffocating, exactly the style of tennis that has carried her to multiple Grand Slam titles throughout her career. At this stage, the story seemed to be writing itself in the most predictable way possible. The scrappy underdog had given it a valiant shot, but the bigger name had weathered the early storm and would surely close things out comfortably in the decider. Except that is not remotely what happened. This is exactly where the match transformed from a compelling near miss into something the entire sport is going to be dissecting for years to come. Before the deciding set began, Alex called for an extended break. It was a savvy, veteran-style move designed purely to disrupt her opponent's newfound momentum and completely reset the tempo of the match at exactly the moment it seemed to be slipping away from her. When she returned to the court, there was a visible shift in her demeanor, an eerie, locked-in calm that suggested she had made peace with whatever was about to unfold next, whichever way it went. The opening game of that third set turned into an absolute war, stretching well past 10 minutes as Alex relentlessly hunted down every single second serve, stepping inside the baseline and taking the ball dangerously early, refusing to give her opponent a single free point. She manufactured break point after break point in that one game alone. Her opponent fought off 4 of them with genuinely superb serving under enormous pressure, composed, clutch, exactly what you would expect from a multiple-time champion in a moment like that. But on the 5th opportunity, something finally cracked, and a tight, nervous forehand sailed straight into the net. Alex had her break, and the roar that followed from the crowd was the kind that sends chills down your spine no matter where you happen to be watching from. From that point forward, what happened to the defending champion was almost painful to witness, in that strange way where you cannot look away even as you feel for the person going through it. The composure that had defined her entire career simply vanished into thin air. Footwork that is normally razor-sharp turned rushed and disorganized. She started chasing lines that were not really there, going for winners that had absolutely no business being attempted at that stage of a match this important, and the unforced errors began stacking up at an alarming rate. Her first serve percentage cratered into the low 40s, a number that would be embarrassing for a recreational player, let alone a multiple major champion on the biggest stage this sport has to offer. And across the net, rather than tightening up or playing it safe the way so many underdogs instinctively do the moment victory suddenly feels within reach, Alex did the exact opposite. She stepped on the gas even harder. Her serves found perfect placement, jamming her opponent's body to draw weak, floating returns she could pounce on at will. She pulled her from corner to corner with such relentless variety that the reigning champions started resembling someone struggling through a practice drill rather than a world number 3 fighting for her tournament life. Another break followed, pushing the score to 5-1. And the silence that swallowed that stadium felt almost heavier than the roar from moments earlier. That specific kind of hush that only descends over a crowd when everyone realizes at the exact same moment that they are watching something genuinely seismic unfold in real time in front of their own eyes. Serving to stay alive in the tournament, the champion opened with a wild, erratic backhand that sailed a good 3 feet long. The very next point brought a double fault, and suddenly she found herself staring down love 30, completely lost out there on a court she once ruled without question. A gorgeous forehand winner briefly delayed the inevitable, one last desperate gasp of resistance from a champion who was not ready to go quietly. But Alex answered immediately with a stunning, full sprint forehand passing shot down the line to bring up double match point. And then came the moment that will be replayed on highlight reels for years to come. The first serve sailed long. She stepped back, wiped her face with a towel, and the entire stadium fell into a silence, so complete you could have heard a pin drop from the nosebleed seats. The second serve clipped the very top of the net cord and died pathetically on her own side of the court. A double fault on match point in the 3rd round of Wimbledon from the defending champion herself. She sank to her knees immediately, burying her face in her hands, visibly shattered by what had just unfolded in front of the entire tennis world watching live. On the opposite side of the net, Alex dropped her racket, collapsed onto the grass, and stared up at the sky, seemingly unable to process what she had just done. She had just taken down an absolute giant of the sport on the biggest court in tennis, and everyone inside that stadium understood exactly what they had just witnessed unfold in front of them. The handshake at the net told its own quiet, heartbreaking story. A brief, respectful embrace before the stunned champion hurried off the court, head down, clearly desperate to escape the cameras and process the collapse somewhere in private, away from every lens pointed at her. Alex, on the other hand, could barely hold back tears during her on-court interview, her voice cracking as she spoke about everything her family had sacrificed, the years spent training far from home, and what this single win meant, not just for her personally, but for an entire nation that had never had a representative reach this deep into a grand slam before. It was the kind of moment that reaches far beyond the sport itself, the kind that ends up written into history books rather than just highlight reels. So let's talk about what this actually means going forward, because a result of this magnitude sends shockwaves through the entire tour, and the ripple effects are going to be felt for a long time. For the fallen champion, this is a genuinely painful setback, the kind that can leave the lingering psychological scar if it is not addressed properly in the weeks that follow. The uncomfortable question every rival on tour is now quietly asking themselves is whether